Well, welcome to this week's edition of Herb of the Week with me, your host, Stephanie Georgiev. I'm also the instructor for the Botanical Medicine Study course, and if you would like a free introductory lesson, email me at stephanie@botanicalmedstudy@gmail.com. There'll be a link in the program notes on how to do that. And when you email me, I will send you a link so that you can download a video and the handouts for the first lesson. At the time of this posting, we are in the beginning of March, Women's History Month. We're still technically in winter, and we know this, especially in many parts of North America right now because of record snowfall in many areas, especially in my beloved home state of California, which is not used to snow, especially in Southern California. I send warm wishes to all who are huddling next to a candle awaiting the National Guard to bring you food and shovel off your roof. But thankfully, all this precipitation has altered the drought in many places in the state. In Western Europe, they've not been so lucky about precipitation. So all we can do is pray right now, or we can also pretend that climate change is not happening because it would interfere with billionaire profit margins of certain industries. As I said earlier, this is Women's History Month, where we celebrate the contributions of women. As a woman who was born as a woman from a woman, I can assure you that our physiology is quite remarkable. And while remarkable, much can and does go wrong with women's bodies, specifically around our reproductive organs. Never fear, nature has provided a plethora of amazing plants that can be used and have been used as long as there were plants and people living together. And these plants help people, particularly women, to facilitate women's wellness. One of the best books I know of on the history of women's herbalism is called Lilies of the Hearth by Jennifer Bennett. So now you have something to read when it comes to the history of women in plants for Women's History Month. In honor of the month, we will be exploring Vitex agnus-castus, or Chaste Berry, for our Herb of the Week, this first week of Women's History Month. I personally love this herb and used it quite frequently in my practice. I'm one of those women who rarely had any issues with my menstruation or menopause, so I did not have to use this herb personally, but I can tell you it was quite effective in clinical practice for all sorts of women's reproductive issues, from menstrual problems to infertility to menopausal symptoms, and it really was quite extraordinary. And that was the only way I used this herb. I didn't use it in other ways. And I used it mainly as a Western herb, and meaning in Western, according to Western diagnosis and Western practice. Now, Vitex agnus-castus, also known as Vitex, chaste tree, chaste berry, and a term I've never seen other than in the literature, Abraham's balm, and lilac trace tree, or my personal favorite, monk's pepper, and that's MONK''S, pepper. That's my favorite term. Now, Vitex is a native of the Mediterranean region. Vitex, the name it was called in that bestseller of antiquity called Pliny the Elder, is derived from the Latin word vio, meaning to weave or tie up. And this is a reference to the use of Vitex agnus-castus in basketry, and obviously not the berries, but the branches and things like that. The small tree was considered to be sacred to the virginal goddess Hestia or Vesta, and it depends on your Greek or Roman affinity, what you want to call this goddess. The name's monk's pepper comes from its use in medieval monasteries, where the male monk brothers would put ground up vitex berries on their food. And because of its actions, apparently it quelled all sexual desire, which was, of course, quite the problem for people who were supposed to be celibate. This stuff stopped the stiffies, if you catch my drift, which is why it is also called Chaste Berry. It helped those frisky friars to keep their pants on and to be, well, chaste, at least in terms of behavior. Vitex agnus-castus is widely cultivated in warm, temperate, and subtropical regions for its delicate textured aromatic foliage and the butterfly attracting midsummer spikes of lavender flowers opening in late summer in cooler climates. It's a wonderful addition to your garden to attract pollinators. The fruits, which are small berries, which when dried look very much like green peppercorns, can be harvested for up to 15 years on the same tree. What is so unique about Vitex is that it acts on the pituitary gland and helps normalize function of the gland. One of the hip and groovy terms in endocrinology in the last years is to bracket, fill in the name of certain glands, organs, and part of the brain, end of bracket, followed by the word axis. This was not the way we were taught back in the 1980s, but thank goodness there's been advances in understanding brain and gland function so we can more accurately create sound programs for people struggling with hormonal issues beyond simply prescribing synthetic hormones. The goal in natural medicine is to help the body function more normally and in health rather than to take over the functions of the body through pharmaceuticals. Now, please don't misunderstand. Often pharmaceuticals can be life-saving and they're very much indicated. And in certain ways, you want to take over bodily functions. And that's what drugs do quite effectively. But the goal of herbal medicine is to help to restore balance in the body. And that is what Vitex does. It works directly on the pituitary gland to help the gland function in a healthy manner and for the gland to ask for the appropriate amounts of hormones to be released into the system from target glands and organs. In traditional Chinese medicine, the Vitex species used is Vitex negundo, which I think sounds very Asian, and is known as manjingzi. The temp of this herb in traditional Chinese medical and herbal terminology is cool, and it is considered bitter and pungent. The organ affinity and the meridians entered by this herb are the bladder, the stomach, and the liver. Now, in traditional Chinese medicine, which is the indications are much different than most of the Western indications, even though the biochemistry supports all of them, both Eastern and Western uses, is to release the exterior, which in Chinese medicine, the exterior, whenever the exterior is being attacked by evil, pernicious influences, that's usually the terminology for having a cold or flu or being susceptible to viruses. So what Manjingzi does is it relieves the exterior. It scatters winds and clears heat. And it's especially good for wind heat associated with the liver and wind damp for painful obstructions. And in Chinese medical theory, the liver energetically dominates tendons and sinews and joints. So any type of joint pain, you want to use liver herbs. And that's why the Chinese use this for damp wind which is basically painful joint pain. So that's your basic intro to Chinese medical terminology. Now, in Ayurveda, Vitex Negundo is known as Negrundi and is mainly used for its antispasmodic properties. And the way they use this is they use the juice from the leaf, and they also use the root and berries in powdered form. And there's a lot of crossover in Ayurveda with our Western understanding, but mostly it's used in Ayurveda for joint pain. Now, the actions of Vitex are quite large. There are anti-inflammatory, antibacterial, antifungal, antimicrobial, antioxidant, anti-cancer, but most of the actions of Vitex that are used in medicinal herbalism are as a hormone normalizer. And as I said before, it works directly on the pituitary. The Vitex is wonderful at helping to regulate menstrual cycles, to bring them back if they've been absent for a while, and also really good to take Vitex if you're coming off birth control pills, to get that hormonal communication back on track between the pituitary glands and the ovaries and so on. Vitex is also good for perimenopausal symptoms and things like hot flashes, and is also helpful for menopause. And of course, if you want to stop your teenage sons from impregnating young women in the heat of the moment, you can also sprinkle Vitex on their morning oatmeal and see what happens. But please consult an herbalist before doing this to your young son. And also, this is for entertainment purposes only. So from 1982 through 2022, there have been 161 different chemical compounds identified in Vitex. So if you're reading something online and there's this little addendum at the end of the description of Vitex that says it's controversial if it actually does anything, and there's no proof and all of that, a simple search on Google Scholar or PubMed will blow you away in terms of the amount of scientific studies as to the efficacy of Vitex. And some of those really fancy terms that you can use to impress your friends and neighbors at your next barbecue, or if you're needing to get rid of a lot of letters in your Scrabble game, they're listed on this slide. There's flavonoids, iridoid glycosides, essential oils, alkaloids, et cetera, et cetera. And Vitex also has steroids in it. Now, there's several ways to take Vitex: in pill form, which can be from the powdered berries in gel caps, or you can also use liquid extract caps. There are tinctures, essential oils, and you can also use the raw dried herb in a tea. And you can either use just the berries, or you can grind them up in your coffee grinder, or often through Chinese supplement companies, they send you it already ground up. Now, please note that Vitex is on the list for contraindications in pregnancy. So if you're trying to get pregnant and you're taking Vitex to normalize your periods, please stop immediately when you know you're pregnant. And for people who are trying to get pregnant, there's so many technologies now that are available. And most people who are trying to get pregnant have access to all of these technologies, the home pregnancy tests and hormone regulators and all sorts of things. So they know within, an hour whether or not they're pregnant. So please, if you are taking Vitex when you are trying to get pregnant, stop it immediately, because you don't want to stop the pregnancy after going to all that trouble to get pregnant. And as is true with all herbal regimens, it's good to get a diagnosis and a formula from a qualified herbalist. As I said before, Vitex is a wonderful tree to have in your garden to attract pollinators. And I've put a link in the program notes on how you can be the first on your block to do so. So I hope you've enjoyed this segment of the Herb of the Week. This is Stephanie Georgiev saying thanks again for spending your valuable time with me. And I hope you have a wonderful Women's History Month. If you're a woman, learning about your history, and if you're not a woman, about appreciating the contributions that women have given to us personally and throughout history. And so until next time, be well.